So a print, as you see here, by Jacques Dehaene II on the element of air shows how falconry was often associated with hope and hence the freedom of flying. The falcon flying above the territory may well serve the man and the woman if trained and handled properly by him or her. But the image also depicts how the falcon was felt to be a form of conquering and defending territory, similar to hunting as a way of training for war. See especially the detail with those riders and their connection to the main figure of the falconer. In the following, I would like to approach the political iconology of falconry from both a material and a visual culture perspective, from studying the migration of animals and that of objects and images. Falconry, one might say, is material and visual culture on the move. Migrating images of falconry and the flying predatory birds themselves have shaped notions of ruling. The falcon has a force that used to be related to the images and their materiality, all the more so when the bird of prey became an image itself. The power of visuality speaks for the agency of the image and its ability to move us emotionally, also bodily. The power of visuality speaks for the agency of the image. And falconry itself is an image practice, is a non-verbal communication between human and animal, as the image and our relationship to it also is. Animation, this is an important term here, was a core component of the image's agency, a force moving aggressively, in Aby Warburg's phrase, toward the beholder, like a falcon stooping down on its prey. The sovereign should have similar strength and overview. Warburg's notion of Bilderfahrzeuge, that Chen Yubing just mentioned, or image vehicles, we could translate that freely from German to English, so Bilderfahrzeuge, image vehicles, offers a helpful perspective here. Warburg defined it as a moving object, a literally moving object, as well as a motive and symbol lending changing associations and meanings to the object. At first he meant prints that wander around. Because of the medium of paper, it's also possible to have mobile images. The term of Bilderfahrzeuge may be applied to the falcons, to the images of falcons, and to the instruments involved in the falcon hunt. I will return to the subject of the instrument very soon, so you will probably understand what I'm talking right now. So adopting Warburg's notion, we may also approach the art of falconry as a visual practice, going way beyond mere hunting or sport. An iconic example from a Manfred manuscript from the Vatican Library, named after the son of Frederick II and his famous De Arte Venandi Cumavibus, which means the art of flying with birds, brings together falconry, art, and power, where Frederick II is posing on his throne with a falcon at his side, with a hooded falcon at his side. I will return to that. Frederick's left hand seems to point to his falcon, which is seen from the back with the hood covering its head, as if the animal is obeying him, similar to his other human subjects. So the falcon is simultaneously a potential weapon and a faithful companion. flying falconry images may well be construed as image vehicles, literally and metaphorically. Like the art of falconry arriving from the East, this is not a European actually tradition. It arrives from the East, from different routes, Central Asia, among others. So, like the art of falconry traveled widely in time and space, so did the image vehicles forging political alliances on their way. And Abi Warburg, whom you see here with his Mnemosine project atlas, that it was being also in Chinese recently, as I heard, linked prints. We said the prints are the main image vehicles for Warburg, to birds flying back and forth between southern and northern Europe. Because what Abi Warburg was interested to was mainly what the situation of movement and motion around Europe is. Something that in later time has changed because one tries to open up this notion of the image vehicle to a more global perspective. Because falcons wander around as images do. One of the best known falcons is the Falco peregrinus, so the peregrine falcon, the falcon that wanders around, which brings us back to the relation of images and falcons as visual and haptic devices. So Warburg focused his work on the European Nachleben, you can call it afterlife, of pagan antiquity and philosophy, largely mediated through Mesopotamian or Arabic sources. The art of falconry was part of it, its afterlife constructed and reflected through numerous images. In his influential lecture, Italian Art and International Astrology in the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara of 1912, which, if you like, is somehow the beginnings of iconology as a method, so it might be interesting for you if you would like to have a look on that. Warburg argued in that lecture that over the centuries, and now I quote Warburg from the English translation which was done at the Getty, symbols for the fixed stars in their wanderings around Asia Minor, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Arabia, and Spain have lost their Grecian clarity of outline. End of quote. Some of these elements just mentioned, and I show you here one of the most famous parts of the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara, they figure in the Schifanoia frescoes. They may be summarized as movement versus stillness, tamed versus untamed, a major dialectic also in the art of falconry. Because, as you might see already, on the right, a hunting party is holding calm, hooded falcons, looking to a rider on a horseback. Note his flattering garment, which is a typical pathos formula, as Warburg would have called it, whose falcon almost escaped from his fist, going right towards us. So falcon and picture are thus transformed into a mirror of princes, not unlike Botticelli's Birth of Venus at the Uffizi in Florence, as discussed by Michael Baxendale. What does Michael Baxendale says here? He says that the bodily postures and gestures of the figures depicted appeal to the viewer's socially instilled bodily habitus. That's why it is about dancing in the Birth of Venus. Here it is about falconry, and one can say that this thing functions almost as mirror of the courtiers posing practically in front of the image, and of course the other way around. The fresco in question offers an allegory of the month of March. Another detail I'm just showing you here only these two details. It is a huge subject. I can only give you the talk only about these Ferrara frescoes. So another detail and allegory of the month of April pictures a falcon in an interior swooping down on a heron, a clearly symbolic scene. I hope you can discern that here. Oops. Okay, let's do this next one. Oh, now it goes back. No, I don't want that. But what I wanted to show is, I hope you can see it up, it's the falcon. Due to the restoration process, it is not evident there, going after a heron, and which is one of the most favorite animals. We will talk about it soon. But I wanted to show that to you here because this scene takes place in an interior. So it's clearly, of course, not possible in falconry that this thing takes place in an interior. So it has a symbolic meaning, an iconological meaning, if you like. Down on the vertical axis, one can discern a young boy handling a falcon gently. I hope you can see it there, while Duke Borso d'Este is engaged nearby. Falconry, one might say, was a corporeal, symbolic ruler's act. Somewhat surprisingly, Warburg only mentions the hunt in passing in his text. He merely speaks of, and I quote again, Warburg, the worldly activities of the court of Duke Borso, who can be seen attending to official business or cheerfully riding out to hunt. End of quote. So Warburg here, interestingly enough, omitted the transformation of the Arabic practices of falconry into Occidental images, but it is easy to understand why. A Western style of falconry deriving from Greek or Roman antiquity, which was actually the interest of Warburg, did not exist. Instead, falconry came to Europe through various routes. So you see already here the global perspective of the subject. Yet the frescoes, even the frescoes are immobile, are perfect examples on a metaphorical, symbolic level of a Bilderfahrzeug. It is no coincidence that the falcon hunt figures in almost all of the fresco's lowest parts. Contrasting with the higher astrological parts, this was a well-considered political symbolic choice. But not everyone in the broader Warburg circle shared his fixation, part of this rhizomatic approach on the Greek or Roman origins of European motifs and symbols. Rudolf Witkova, for instance, adopted a middle position between Erwin Panofsky, the other founder of iconology, but totally different than Warburg, and Aby Warburg, of course, himself, and pursued in today's vocabulary the motif of the eagle and serpent from a global perspective. By the way, in the same volume of the Journal of the Warburg and Courtauld Institutes where Warburg's serpentine ritual first appeared. So Witkova argued that the motif had not one single origin, but several origins, that of the eagle and the serpent, spreading simultaneously around the world. Something similar, one could say, concerning falconry. In another essay, Warburg conceived animals as he called them, kinetic symbols, so moving symbols, a felicitous phrase to describe the flying falcons depicted in the flying Bilderfahrzeuge. So from my side, combining those two approaches, Warburg's and Witkova's, avoiding eclecticism, seems the best starting point to situate the political iconology involved, in our case, in falconry. So falconry was a performative ritual of each court, reaching from Europe to the Indian subcontinent and even partly China, an effective medium of unfolding power. In the case of China, falconry was connected to imperial hunting and the state. For instance, the tombs of some wealthy commoners and officials are decorated with falconry scenes in Han China around 147, 184, or the tomb here, excuse me for my Chinese, of Li Chonggrun, known as Crown Prince Yide of 682 to 701, which is a fine example. And of course, we just talked about it before, about the Tang dynasty, its role, let's say, within mainland China or not, but especially in the Tang dynasty, maybe because of this minority situation, has a specific important place in falconry and China. In this context, one should mention the 9th century treatise, Kitab al-Mutawakil, the falcon and hound book of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakil, authored by Muhammad, so we are in the Islamic heritage now, who summed up older sources about the relationship between hunting, falconry, and sovereignty. In this work, it becomes clear once again how widely falconry was distributed worldwide, not only in practical, but also in theoretical terms, in the form of treatises, and how widely it was seen as an exercise of government. The author explains, and I quote Mutawakil, "This is why kings of different people were so much occupied to ask their wise people to write books about how one should proceed and reign. And the one among the Greek philosophers who was known for this was Heracles and Plato. And the most famous among the kings who commissioned them was Hierophridon. And also the sage of the Turks dealt with it. And the most famous king who commissioned works was Fakan, the king of the Turks. And also the sage of the Persians dealt with it. Also many of the sage and kings of the Indians dealt with it. Likewise did the sage and kings of China." So you hear already, 9th century Arabic treatise, how a widespread phenomenon the relationship between falconry and governmental issues is. Falconry and state power were, in other words, often interrelated. Already in the Onirokritikon, the dream interpreter, written by the Basra scholar Ahmed in the end of the 7th century, we encounter the notion that, and I quote, "the hawk and falcon signify a position of power." The hawk and falcon signify a position of power second after the king. End of quote. An idea found worldwide, it has been expressed in varying cultural forms. In an emblem from the collection of the Hungarian humanist Ioannis Amboucous, dedicated to the Republican humanist Pietro Vettori, it was expressed in a typically European context. We see a nobleman, his left hand resting on a long sword, and his right hand holding a lure. I will return to this lure. It looks like a flying object. Up in the air, his falcon chases 3 birds, while a servant standing at the right holds 2 dogs on a leash. The nobleman's virtue clearly lies in his handling of the bird of prey with the lure. The emblem is titled Cura Publica, thus thematizing the interrelations of falconry, political power, and the state. And there is also a text. I just now project to you the emblem and not the text, but the text explains that the true ruler, like the falcon, ought to serve the common good, cura publica, and I quote, because the falcon speaks now in the first person, I, the falcon, I'm totally devoted to hunting. Since long, nature has attributed this capacity to me so that I can serve my masters in the air and gladden them with the prey. May those to whom public administration leaves no rest show that they care for the common good rather than for themselves. End of quote. So cura publica and the mutual care of master and falcon are interchangeable. Borrowing from anthropologist Clifford Geertz, we might construe the art of falconry as a performative practice, the flying and stooping falcon included, as the period's theater state in full motion. The connection between sovereignty, potency, and falconry is already brilliantly described in the famous early 13th century French novel, The Quest of the Holy Grail, a medieval fantasy par excellence, if you like. So one passage deals there with a king of a barren country who, in battle, was mutilated between the legs and could therefore neither walk nor ride. In other words, he was incapable in representational terms. For that reason, he stayed on a boat and fished and went by the name Fisher King. During this period, his falconers used to hunt through his woods and overtook governing, but not representational sovereignty. That's very important. This story highlights the importance of the image of the king, who was impotent in a quite literal sense, and therefore not in a position to govern. Falconry is in this case an equivalent to running the businesses of and governing the state, while the impotent king is fixed like a statue in a representational position that enables him, still officially at least, to remain ruler. A striking and similar example with a more positive touch is a source from 893 that appears in Asser's biography of Alfred the Great, King of Wessex. And I quote, "Meanwhile, therefore, the king, between wars and the frequent hindrances of the present life, as well as the attacks of the pagans and the daily illness of his body, did not leave off from presiding over the government of the kingdom, engaging in every art of hunting, instructing all his goldsmiths and craftsmen, falconers, hawk handlers, and dog handlers." End of quote. So here is important. Not only is a representation of government, despite wars and illnesses of the sovereign's body, explicitly connected in this elegy with hawking and falconry, but also craftsmen and goldsmiths are put into the same context as falconers, thus underlining the visual power of falconry and sovereignty. In contrast to the Fisher King, in physical terms, a falconer was ideally a fit young man, a bit less so a woman, even if in aristocracy in Europe, as we should see, it was a bit different, in his prime, underlining the role of power and connecting body and mind. It was even said, almost in superstitious fashion, that falconry was responsible for hunting down illnesses, which is another kind of agency. A sovereign with an intact and fit body had to be as perfect and powerful as the animals with which he or she was hunting. transmission of power and skills such as accurate sight, endurance, and speed is connected to the human-falcon relationship. Frederick II, we saw him at the beginning with his bird of prey and the hood, crafted the image of the ideal falconer in words. It should be someone who is also a ruler of sorts, since falconry was a micrography of sovereignty, even if critical voices were raised about his fixation on falconry, which resulted in the neglect of state affairs. By the way, something that also popes are accused of later. Here, the Aristotelian concept of aurea mediocritas, mesotis, which means more or less a kind of average, but an average in the most positive sense, because it is a balance, is central, since the falconer had to be average in this old sense of the word, embodying an equilibrium that is also necessary for a good ruler, a balance in mental as well as bodily terms. So the cura publica emblem here underlines and establishes the transformation of a natural into a political landscape, with a falcon hovering high above the territory, substituting and extending the ruler's sovereignty over it. Culture, the ruler's handling of the falcon, was thus turned into nature, like the prey killed by the falcon could be turned into culture, into the ruler's physical or pictorial hunting trophies. You see here that this dialectic somehow is broken with this shifting of back and forth between nature and culture. The idea of political historian Ernst Kantorowicz, who spoke of the king's two bodies, does not apply here in the sense of, as Kantorowicz said, an eternal, through images, body versus a worldly, decaying body, but rather the paradigmatic substitution of the body through the falcon as an avatar of the falconer, often even supported through the medium of an internal image. The extension of the sovereign in the air through the falcon brings in a dimension of contingency. The sovereign is entirely at the mercy of his or her falcon. This fact may have subversive consequences, since control and power are transmitted to a non-human factor with self-will, because falcons can never be tamed. There are dozens of images of young female and male rulers handling a falcon. Women supposedly used to fly lighter hawks like merlins or sparrowhawks, whilst young boys were more often seen with a falcon on their fist than girls. They started with smaller birds, but there are, as you can see here, some images, and as I already mentioned, of medieval young women carrying hawks and accompanied by dogs, like here on the edge, the southern Italian sardonyx agate of the so-called falconiera from the first half of the 13th century. The luxurious practice of falconry is encapsulated in the precious material in which the young lady is presented. For both reasons, the function of the object can only be fulfilled in a courtly context. So, having to deal with the unexpected made falconry a perfect learning school for sovereigns. Falconry marked the threshold between childhood and adulthood in a prince's education, as we saw already in Ferrara with a young courtier and his hawk. One telling example shows the father of Charles V, Philip the Handsome, on the left-hand side, painted by the master of the Magdalene legend. Philip has as a kind of conductor the virgula in his hand, which is this device to stroke gently the feathers of the falcon. So he successfully demonstrates that he can make use of this device by stroking his hooded hawk. He also masters his subjects in an elegant fashion. A dynasty of power is crafted, since in Vienna, here on the right, there is a similar image in terms of composition of Charles V that was often thought to depict his father because of their striking likeness. The technique of falconry is manifested as a mobile legacy of power and images, crafted through images. In a number of images, particularly in the 17th century Netherlands, children of wealthy, non-aristocratic families, sometimes if they may not physically convince us, like the boy on the left, that they can make it, were depicted as fashionable and self-assured falconers. So the cura publica is transformed here into a cura economica, falconry as a model for handling businesses. Pero López de Ayala refers in his 14th century manual falconry's essential role in a prince's education because, as he claims, it trained patience or endurance, crucial skills for a future sovereign. In other words, mastering falconry encapsulated the essential features of a good prince. The training of these body techniques, in Marcel Mauss's words, took years, and if these were skipped, things could go terribly wrong. Take a very modern example, like Donald Trump, posing for photo session for the American elections in 2016. So in his office, he had to hold an eagle, symbol of American freedom, by the name of Uncle Sam. But the poor bird immediately went for his famous golden dyed hair. And look what happened. Trump, as he said later, was not afraid. Still, this was not quite the cura publica that we saw in Sambucu's emblem. By the way, it's a very nice video to see how the bird, Trump tries to show that he's very cool, but then the bird is going after him, so it doesn't look good for him. Look, check on that. Already in a Spanish 13th century translation of a celebrated Arabic treatise on falconry from the mid-9th century, mastering the art of falconry stood for mastering the art of governing. And this was a major philosophical theme. Saber gobernar es una gran partida de filosofía, they say there. To know how to govern is the big game of philosophy. According to the treatise, the body techniques of falconry imitate life itself. Kings have to exercise and practice these techniques so that they will rule successfully. Muhammad, the author of the already mentioned Falcon and Hound book, summed up older sources about the relationship between hunting, falconry, and sovereignty, and declared, and I quote, "This is why kings of different people," we have mentioned them in the quote before, "were so much occupied to ask their wise people to write books about how one should proceed and reign." Later, in the early 16th century, just to name one famous example, Niccolò Machiavelli pointed out how the principe, the prince, has to know the nature of humans and that of animals. Using this knowledge properly enhances the sovereign's own authority. So the political iconology of falconry rested, if you like, on a kind of dialectic between shepherd and wolf, cura publica and war. And I will return to this dialectic a bit later, because I think this is very important, how falconry can be shepherd and it can be wolf at the same time. I will give a brief example for a communal cura publica in 14th century Italy, so beyond aristocracy, notably the Republic of Siena. We see, and here is again the emblem, we see a falconer coming out of town to go to the country in an allegory of good government by the painter Ambrogio Lorenzetti from around 1340. I hope you can discern here the man with a falcon in his hand, and there is another one hunting also with a falcon. We see a falconer and in this fresco on a wall in the town hall of Siena, so not anywhere, which shows wider social participation beyond that of the aristocracy alone. In another detail that I just mentioned, but I hope you can see it here a bit better, one can identify a falconer already hunting in a cultivated landscape where other people are also pursuing their daily activities. Perhaps not coincidentally, the fresco offers a bird's eye view. So it is as if we are a bird looking above this huge territory. It is also telling that the scene, like so many falconry images, revolves around movement and mobility. Everyone is in movement in this image. Above the first falconer, Lorenzetti inserted the allegory of security. I hope, you can see it also in that image over there with the flying image of security. Another indication of how the arts of falconry and good government, because here it is the good government allegory, tended to be associated with each other. As has been argued, there is some affinity here with Giotto's depiction of justice in his Arena Chapel frescoes in Padova, with its inscription freely translated. You find the inscription here, as far, and I quote, "the arm of justice reaches, the brave soldier hunts, people sing and others trade." The falconers, mounted on their horses, I hope you can discern them over there, seem to bring justice and security. These are clearly privileged individuals that may co-govern, but at least it is about a shared kind of power. In this sense, even if the class relations are not criticized, and how one would expect such a thing in such a representational medium anyway, since the whole work is done for a representative part of the community, there is a Republican echo not in the sense of Donald Trump, just to clarify this, that goes beyond aristocracy. Such images reveal the different social worlds that resonate through falconry in medieval times. For a Republican understanding, but certainly not exclusively, falconry was a commonwealth. One also in the sense of stability that a good sovereign or a community, as in this case, brought as made manifest in images such as in Lorenzetti's. Falconry gear, and I already mentioned the lure and the hood, were devices set by the ruler in motion, connecting his or her own body with that of the falcon. And this was a result of hard training in human-animal interaction. In this second part of the lecture, I would like to elaborate a bit more on this instrumental side of falconry's material culture. So when hearing the word hood, many today may think primarily of hip-hop or demonstrations, and we also associate this term with burqas. In our term, in our subject, the present context will deal with a different kind of hood intended not for humans, but for animals, and more precisely, hawks, moving somewhere between subversive resistance and willfulness. It is a case, a container of a mobile living being as the falcon is. And I took this image. It is a Japanese hood maker who was doing an exhibition in Abu Dhabi, and I find he does very beautiful, modern looking, but also traditional looking kind of hoods. So the idea of the hood addresses the question of covering and uncovering, the presence and absence of the gaze, seeing, not seeing, focusing and targeting, and their opposites. Falconry, instruments in Vienna's rich collection of items relating to Maximilian I includes many hoods, one of which dates from around the end of the 15th century, like the one I show you here. In the typical European, but also Arabic designs, thin straps that are called braces, most commonly made of leather, draw the hood closed, securing it on the hawk's head. And I just wanted to show you here those two images, which are both from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The one derives from India, from the Punjab region, and the other is from the Netherlands. But you see how close those two things are. So hooding was a common transcultural practice since the Middle Ages, changing relatively little, one has to say, in terms of technique and indeed basic hood designs to the present day. The hood was brought to Europe from the Middle East under the already mentioned name of burqa by Frederick II that we just saw. So again, in his book, Frederick II, we find more information about the device. And I quote you now Frederick II, which is around 1248. So the falcon's hood is a discovery of Oriental peoples, the Arabs having, so far as we know, first introduced it into active practice. We ourselves, when we sailed across the seas, saw it used by them and made a study of their manner of manipulating this head covering. The Arabian chiefs not only presented us with many kinds of falcons, but sent with them falconers, experts in the use of the hood. In addition to these sources of knowledge, from the time when we first decided to write a book, a complete treatise on falconry, we have imported partly from Arabia, partly from other countries, both birds and men skilled in the art, from whom we have acquired a knowledge of all their accomplishments. In another passage of the book, he even says, we brought people from all around the world. So you hear already this idea of transculturality and universality that Frederick tries to bring with, also concerning his policy as an emperor who is concerned with Islamic subjects as well as Christian subjects. But let us go back to the hood. The hood should calm the hawk during the manning and training stages, but also before she hunts, preventing, for instance, her wasting energy attempting to at quarry, which the falconer does want not to hunt, or in places she may not be safely or legitimately flown. You may ask yourself, why do I say about the falcon she or her? This is something quite important. The reason I'm saying that is that the most of the falcons we are talking about here are actually female, because the biggest falcons, the fastest falcons, the strongest falcons are the female ones and not the male ones. This is also why Shakespeare, if you read The Taming of the Shrew, he uses many metaphors of falconry and also gender relations, which is a very interesting subject for itself, actually. But I just wanted to clarify, why do I say she here or her? So the hood is not only a functional instrument, but has also an aesthetic autonomy that starts to be visible in Frederick's treatise. I don't know, do I have it here? Yes, I have it. I just wanted to show you here, it's quite interesting. This is the treatise of Frederick, right? That I was quoting you just now, the part of the text. And you see down there, almost thrown, is a hood. So the hood is shown there by a painter, almost as if it is, a detail, but it starts to taking up a very autonomous position that almost has a visual metaphor perspective, if you like. Every hood should be specifically tailored to fit an individual hawk and hence is unique. Through falconry instruments in general, the never to be achieved and indeed seldom desired tameness, as I said, a falcon cannot be tamed, and the immense gap between the falcon and the human is somehow diminished or seemingly brought under moderate control. The inflexibility of the hood's leather must become the hawk's second skin, as it needs to be comfortable, otherwise she will not remain calm. Hoods are often decorated with feathers alluding to lightness and flight. The hood additionally refers to a power that is connecting to the question of sovereignty and is used as a metaphor for it, since it is the decision of the falconer sovereign when and what the hawk should see and therefore hunt or not see and hence remain calm. Hood sometimes carried a coat of arms, like here as a kind of stamp, acting as visual devices marking the sovereign's power. The hood of Maximilian highlights the symbolic quality of such items. The owner's emblem, here the double eagles of the Habsburg, which is the Habsburg monarchy, with a huge imperium, appears as an icon upon the hood's gilded leather. When carried, the hooded falcon becomes a symbol of imperial power, since it is in movement by virtue of being borne on someone's fist, whether mounted or on foot, before its use in a royal hunt or during a diplomatic mission. When her sight is temporarily dimmed through the hood, the hawk becomes the iconic symbol of the institution, here the Habsburgs, under whose power she will subsequently act when the hood is removed, allowing her to target quarry. In other words, the hawk is under the auspices of the Habsburgs and should serve them symbolically and in practice. Hoods frequently feature no figurative devices on their surface, though sometimes they do carry dazzling ornaments with powerful colors, as if the hawk's not seeing condition is translated into abstract ornamentation. One important but maybe less known item of falconry furniture was the verval. And again, I quote Frederick, who describes it in order also to tell you what it is about the verval. Two rings or two stitches of cuirass, no matter whether they are of iron, bronze, or horn. This is golden. The unperforated end of the jesses, which must hang down at the back of the hawk's feet, will be inserted into the ring, and the portion of the strip that will pass through this ring will be folded and sewn to the rest of the strap, so that it will not have crossed the ring, but it will be not. So vervals could potentially bear images of falcons with the coat of arms of their owner and even be made of precious metals. This speaks for the fact that falconry furniture was almost as important as the falcons themselves. The clothes make the king. However, even vervals made of very precious materials such as gold may also simply bear inscriptions, as it is the case here, a verval from England from around 1400s, without an image, has a rather modest looking inscription. But let us look at the inscription, what it says. It says, "I belong to the King of England," reads the potential finder of the lost hawk. So those verbals were used actually in order, if the case they were lost, that the finder find them and know who they belong to. This has a double symbolic aspect. It is as if the precious golden object, as well as the hawk that bore it, required no further explanation. The signature, I belong to the King of England, is a kind of agency on a linguistic level, what philosopher John L. Austin called speech act, that is connected to a specific dazzling golden object in the sense of a visual agency. So both indications elevate the hawk's status, warning anyone who might dare to harm or steal her of terrible consequences. We know that people were heavily punished if they harmed a hawk. For instance, if a peasant harmed a falcon, unless shown mercy by a sovereign, he would be blinded. This is another kind of hierarchy that is constituted through hawking gear. Finally, another and last example of falconry furniture with a striking visual dimension as a moving and even flying object par excellence is the lure. Again, we're back on this idea of the image vehicles and the lure that we saw with the man holding it in the emblem of Cura Publica that I told you I will return back to that. The lure used to bring the flying falcon back to the falconer's fist. This was a quite difficult technique. If not properly mastered, the falcon might fly away, a serious loss both in financial and breeding terms. When the lure is swung, the falcon believes there is another bird to catch and will thus return to her master. Putting a piece of meat on the lure, the falconer keeps the bird's instinct alive and rewards her at the same time. The whole business of meat and reward is also an elaborate one because it tries to keep a sort of trust between human and animal. The ars, the art, is to create artificially an as-if wild state that gives the falcon the sense of being in its natural habitat. This as-if element goes well along with the idea of deception, visual deception as well. The lure helps the falcon to forget that she is wild, yet another aspect of her culturalization. Lures, as you can see here, carried finely made images, elevating them quite literally to image vehicles. Lures were in this sense artfully created and quite functional mobile. In this case here, feathers of a heron are partly forming the device and make it look like an amulet. The richly ornamented lure that was made in northern Italy around 1500s combined representative functions of courtly art with the functionality of a mobile hunting device. The embroidered portraits of a man and a woman, I hope you can discern them from there, probably shown Maximilian and Bianca Maria Sforza, his second wife, who supposedly brought the lures together with living falcons from Milan to Vienna as a marriage gift. The embroidery not only refers to the couple's common passion, but also to the hope of a successful hunt. To this comes additionally the erotic connotation of falconry, which since the late Middle Ages refers to the falcon lure as a metaphor for conquering someone's heart. The question of ruling through the use of the luring device and the motive of the fight between falcons and herons have a direct association with one another. I will return to that. As other Habsburg examples from the collection of Maximilian illustrate, the lures swung in the air were both mobile decoys and mobile works of art. They are also equipped with heron or crane feathers, and they display images of quarry, even somewhat surprisingly of deer standing or sitting in a landscape. So when the lure is not in motion, as you see here, is immobile, the image with the deers is perceivable, at least for the particular aristocratic hunting party, as a kind of visual prospective prey. The deers cannot be attacked by the falcons, these are too big animals for them, only by the human observers of the image, who are also the agents setting the lure in motion. The lure swung in the air is perceived by the falcon as another bird. So as soon as the lure is swung in the air, the falcon thinks this is another bird. So we have also a change of conditions. Both humans and falcons are addressed here in different ways concerning the lure being freezed or in motion. So luring also means here the power of the instrument image in its dual affordance to address a human as well as animal audience. On the so-called Ambraza court game, from the circle of the famous painter Konrad Witz from around 1440, we can observe one card, two lures that appears asymmetrical on a red background, as if symbolizing red meat, or even, at least to our modern eyes, the passion for falconry. The card game, this is a card game, also includes hounds, falconers, hawks, and herons. In other words, the whole system of falconry, even if the agents appear individually on their respective cards. So they are brought into interaction with one another during the card game. In the case of the lures, these animate the other players to lure their antagonists. They also underline the discrepancy between movement and stillness, because it is the medium of the card that may bring them into motion through the human hand, also an image vehicle. Taking risks in the game is underlined through the contingent nature of falconry. What is at stake here is, in other words, the visual power of the instrument itself and its aesthetic appeal as such. This is also connected with the fetishization of falconry and its respective industry of literal image vehicles such as lures and cards depicting them. But beside the motion of flying falcons and swinging lures, the latter also picture the falconers in action, as you can see here how this luring takes place. The handling of the lure becomes a powerful image with a seductive force of art, as seen in the Book of Vows of another passionate falconer, Engelbert II. And I show you here parallel his portrait of the same man. You can see that Engelbert holds a hooded falcon with his left hand, whereas he puts his right hand on the painted frame of the image. This is a kind of meta-pictorial commentary. The frame, the hand, is also painted. Fingers and plumage transgress, I hope you can see that, the image's boundaries, a detail one can only observe in front of the artwork itself, in this case in Amsterdam. The same holds for the body of the falconer, perhaps Engelbert himself, we already saw, and note the body S-shaped line which enhances the motions of both the falcon and the lure swinging in the air, and at the same time the page's ornamental calligraphy. In the same period, the last decades of the 15th century, the serpentine line came to be seen as the essence of elegance. So this attempt to discipline one's own body correlates here with the game of disciplining the other, here the falcon through the art of falconry. This fact had simultaneously a moving and metaphorical quality that is connected to the actual motion of the lure. Maybe you are, you know the story of Zeuxis and his perfectly painted grapes that even fooled the birds, as you can see here. And this is actually transferred, if you like, into the realm of falconry as a visual practice. The lure moves in all kinds of ways different agents without a hierarchy between human and animal. The falcons know that they will receive some meat for their action, so they play with the falconer who sets the lure in motion and go after it as if it were real prey. In other words, simulation and dissimulation are essential part of training in human-animal interaction. One might say that a ruler's successful ruling succeeded in transforming the untamed flying of the falcon into a metaphor of his or her pura publica. And this transforming worked best when manifested as dynamically as possible through all those moving and movable images and instruments of falconry we may well define as image vehicle that are deceptive moving images of power. To rule means to be able to know how to lure as well. So now I would like to turn to the third and last part of the lecture. Should we have a pause or not, is my question, or should I continue? Are you exhausted? Maybe we have a short pause? 5 minutes?
5 minutes? Okay.
Maybe? I don't know. What do you say?
Yeah, I think it's better to have a
To have a short break and then we continue to this aspect of political landscape. Otherwise, maybe it's too much for you. Yeah?
yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Me, it's a lot. It's a big subject. I just came out of the plane, but I hope I have still some energy, okay? And you too, if you have immediate questions or things that you need to answer, of course, ask me that. But now we will continue to something that I hope that it becomes a bit more clear because it was already elaborated in the first part. So that part now that I would like to elaborate a bit more and that we already saw with the Cura Publica emblem is the question of relationship between falconry and landscape. Because the so-called shapeability of landscape, which is already suggested by the etymology of the Dutch word landschap. You hear landscape. Landschap is meaning the shaping of the land. This is actually what landscape is. And this is clearly present in activities such as hunting or falconry, particularly when these are associated with gestures of political power. Generally speaking, the practice of falconry forms a visual manifestation of power. When hunting with falcons, elites display their capital symbolically, and we saw this already many times. For example, here an engraving of around 1600 shows a Dutch nobleman riding his horse in a lordly way while carrying a falcon on his fist. Visible in the background is an expansive landscape with houses, hills, and boats on the water. A quatrain in German characterizes the sheet as follows, and I quote, "In the Netherlands, the nobility go hunting in this way in the wide green landscape, a falcon in one hand." So the nobleman is given a falcon, an indispensable attribute of his lifestyle, which he takes along when riding out to hunt, exploring the landscape, or even dominating it. Here I focus on Netherlandish landscape painting and the place of falconry within this genre, a subject that has received little attention. The visual construction of a territory as a landscape of power is accomplished through the lens of falconry, which served as a political tool. It affords us an overview of the territory. This bird's eye view offers a privileged perspective of a shapeable landscape, very much in the etymological sense of the word in Dutch. As I already said, landschap, landscape, shape of land. I'm using here explicitly the concept of the political landscape that you can find here, a term coined by Martin Vanke. Martin Vanke, a very important figure who actually reopened to the public the Warburg House in Hamburg and coined also the idea of political iconography and iconology. So Vanke argued that a landscape, in particular a cultural landscape, may bear the traces of a political semantics. Such traces may be left by the physical presence of a ruler, of course, by sites of power, such as castles and palaces, but also by practices associated with the exercise of authority, among them hunting, and in particular the falcon hunt. The same is true of battles, tournaments, and even games. Landscapes are shaped beyond the natural elements constituting them. The focus here is on cultural technologies that are also instruments of power, so that such landscapes become political landscapes. If you like, surveillance before the idea of having camera is of course authorized and exercised also through images that are two-dimensional in a kind of sense. So underscored in depictions of landscapes that thematize falconry is the already elaborated aspect of the cura publica, mainly the maintenance of the state or of the territory of the landscape, which is represented symbolically through falconry. But existing at the same time is a destructive element which is present in the landscape through the iconic pair of the raptor and the heron, and which hence generates a semantics that is opposed to the previous aspect that I already also, I think, thematized. So both levels are combined in the so-called bird's eye view. Here it is the artist, as we shall see, who makes a not inconsiderable contribution, since it is precisely the bird's eye view that makes possible the visualization of the political landscape. So through reference to specific pictures, including works by Jan Bruegel the Elder, I will seek to show how these antithetical semantic levels propagate the visual survey of the landscape in its peaceful condition, and not by coincidence, moreover, during the 12 years truce in the Netherlands. But let us have first a look at etymology, that I already said, landschap, landscape. Two important English language treatises on the art of landscape reflect upon the etymology of the word, identifying it as Dutch, as Netherlandish in origin. The one case is in the miniature art of liming of 1650. Edward Norgate points to the Dutch as the coiners both of the word and the genre, and I quote, "It is more than time to proceed to the second, which is landscape, or landskap, an art so new in England and so lately come ashore, as all the language within our four seas cannot find it a name, but a borrowed one, a borrowed name, and that from a people that are no great lenders, but upon good security, the Dutch landscape, or shape of land." Before him, already in 1606, Henry Peacham mentioned the Dutch word in the following way, and I quote, "Landskip is a Dutch word. It is as much as we should say in English, landship, or expressing," this is quite interesting, how he introduces now the term landscape, expressing the lands by hills, woods, castles, seas, valleys, ruins, hanging rocks, cities, towns, as far as may be shoot within our horizon. Significant here is the implicit reference to the bird's eye view in the phrase, as far as we may be shoot within our horizon. Then there is the fact that the atmosphere, which is to say the heavens, are part of the landscape since they surround it. And I quote, "You shall always in your landscape shew a fair horizon and express the heaven," which means the sky, "more or less either overcast by clouds or with a clear sky, shewing by sun rising," etc. So in 16th century England, the term landscape did not refer as today exclusively to the depicted land, but to the surrounding air as well, to the water, and moreover prior to the establishment of the seascape as an independent genre. Of significance as well for landscape in the early modern era is a further level of meaning, namely that of the exercise, and this is important here for us, even the power of the gaze to look through something, which express, and I quote, "places of larger prospects as whole countries where this eye seem not to be hindered by any object, but to pass as far as the force therefore can pierce." You hear here that the gaze is almost like an arrow that pierces through the landscape, so to speak. So you see how important the power of the gaze and, of course, of the landscape is in terms also of political power. The ruling elites demonstrate their power of the landscape through falconry and hence their visual control of the territory, at least symbolically. For this purpose, the bird's eye view and hence the visualized political landscape is the perfect template for allowing something along these lines to be created or shaped by an artist who is now an artful land surveyor, a surveillant of a territory, a creator of landscapes and hence of images as well. A connection between the bird's eye view, falconry, political power is observable in a marvelous way in a townscape of Brussels, Belgium, that depicts an almost military dominion over the landscape. The extremely large, broad sheet engraved by Sandford is divided into three parts, with a portrait of the King of Spain, Philip IV, occupying the center. The portrait underscores the image's function of representing the king's political power. He is moreover stylized as an almost divine figure. Depicted to his right is the archangel Michael as the Christian soldier triumphing over Lucifer. Displayed on the left, it is on your right from here, on your right from here, coat of arms of Brabant, today Belgium, surrounded by a flock of birds with raptors and herons among them, involved in the fighting taking place before the town gates. Evidently, the raptors and also the Christian soldier, so the archangel, not only accompany the portrait of the king as extension of his power, but also act in his name. Included beneath the coat of arms is a noble company of Habsburgs who are clearly shown setting a raptor loose on a heron and gazing upward. As a reference to their power, a number of men hold raptors on their fists. Among them are two princes. Established in this way on the earth and in the sky, both shown from a bird's eye view, is the connection between sky and land, and hence also between the political insignias of power suspended above the city and the surrounded landscape, a kind of vertical power. A man from the company of hunters calls the raptors back with a so-called feather lure that we have already seen. I hope you can discern it, the lure from the image. With his back towards us, he becomes a figure of identification for the beholder. In this way, the viewer is inserted into the perspective of the city of Brussels under the guardianship of the ruling Habsburgs, who certified their authority over a contested region visually as well. Of course, a bird's eye view does not require falconry in order to exist. It is a construct of the human imagination. A bird's eye view is a human's eye view. But the corresponding perspective, the view from above, is put to the test on a flat, broad, governable, and hence shapeable landscape. The fact that falconry supplies us with a perfect metaphor in this context is attributable to the falcon's inherent traits. Among all of the raptor species typically used in falconry, the falcons are the swiftest creatures on Earth and are endowed with an extraordinarily accurate visual acuity that allows them to detect prey from several kilometers away. The vision of a falcon is approximately 8 times more precise than human vision, and its spatial perception is utterly different as well. The sweeping dive of a raptor is a natural spectacle with a high aesthetic value. Such a bird plunges downwards towards the earth like a bolt of lightning, and the corresponding form of vision resembles an all-seeing perspective, a multi-perspective. Moreover, the multi-perspective corresponds to the boundless and ungovernable movement of the raptor, which can nonetheless be captured motionless within a picture frame. So the frame somehow tries to capture the non-capturable force and fastness of the bird of prey, kind of a paradox, if you like. The all-seeing eye, or better put, the eye of the raptor, recalls a divine power with the corresponding topos of the eye of God, which is in the Western tradition a very important subject, the eye of the God, which is embodied in the bird's eye view or in the view from above. The view from above also involves a political or privileged seeing. Who sees what, one can ask. The paradigmatic substitution of the ruler for the raptor along a vertical axis of power allows the ruler to survey the respective territory, to defend it, but also to expand it. This subjugating power descends from above via the bird of prey, which is simultaneously a corporeal and kinetic substitute for the ruler. A flat, open landscape can be symbolically dominated by performative activities such as falconry. The landscape is an expression, even a disposition of the exercise of power, as this is eloquently expressed in the above-mentioned print. But of course, a landscape changes in a dynamic way depending upon which natural life forms populate it, whether human, animal, or plant. And this was argued by Samuel van Hoogstraten, a Rembrandt pupil, by the way, who attested to the reform of landscape painting already under the Roman Empire, remarking as follows. Unfortunately, van Hoogstraten was not aware at all about what the role of landscape painting was in China, so he only has in his view the European tradition. I quote van Hoogstraten: "In the time of Augustus, Ludius, which was a painter, Roman painter, took up the depiction of landscapes anew and reformed it, for he introduced a way to paint villas, farms, herbs, flowers, woods, hills, brooks, rivers, ports, and he furnished this landscape with strolling figures and fishermen, others who sought their pleasure on the water, hunters and falconers." Van Hoogstraten mentions such examples alongside other ornaments. This is the word he uses, ornaments of the landscape. So you see already here the idea of the ornament as also something artistic, which unite the water and sky with the earth, and which contain people who are occupied with luring and capturing prey, which is to say fishermen, hunters, and falconers. Such activities involve interactions between nature and culture, but even more generally, the relationship between image and beholder. Raptors introduce movement into the landscape, not unlike bolts of lighting or clouds, and this relates simultaneously to the symbolic dimension of falconry as well as to its pragmatic function as an elite pastime. In both instances, the bird's eye view is the most suitable means for representing both the natures of falconry. Moreover, the bird's eye view is the ideal template of, or condition for the depiction of an expansive landscape. Things are very different with depiction of the ocean or the lakes, since in a two-dimensional image, objects are visible only on the water surface, but not within it. The transparency, or if you like, the alluded transparency of the atmosphere makes possible for falconry to become embedded in the image with more freedom. The polarity of figure and ground, proximity and distance are drawn together in falconry and visualized accordingly, all the more so since it is accompanied by an awareness of the raptor's extraordinarily sharp vision. It is a question of the non-systematic registration of place and of the landscape as a political tool for symbolic surveillance by a creature that emblematizes authority, since the animal acts as the ruler's extension. At this point, it is worth recalling the classic work of J. Appleton, whose The Experience of Landscape links certain landscape schemata with specific animal behavior, and more particularly the bird's eye view with the predator, a raptor that scans the landscape as a strategic field. I will not be pursuing the question here of the validity of Appleton's habitat theory and the criticisms it has received. Far more essential here, in my view, is the way in which the beholder and his or her gaze, which is to say his visual faculty, coincide with that of a raptor. In this way, visuality coincides with surveillance and potential aggression, and moreover, in the spirit of falconry. So we can, in other words, speak of a kind of surveillance landscape. So certain images, as we already saw, participate in war making, while others make peace or even forge alliances, as we saw with the image by Lorenzetti. Hunting on the whole, and falconry in particular, assist rulers in familiarizing themselves with their own territories and hence with the landscape, helping them to prepare for war. Raptors are literally metaphorical weapons. The outcome of a battle is uncertain, according to an emblem on the right created by Johannes Camerarius in 1599. It shows a raptor attacking a heron, but not yet defeating the heron. The heron is also a very agile creature. The still leafless branch that extends from a stump of tree in the foreground and seems to gesture toward the struggle above opens up the possibility of destruction as well as of rebirth, underscoring the uncertainty of the conflict's outcome. Moreover, the tondo, this circle format, with the possibility of rotation, suggests that the struggle might experience a reversal, which would, however, result in an inverted world. The question of dominance, embodied in the motive of the struggle between heron and raptor, appears in dozens, if not hundreds, of images. And I'll just show you on the left this miniature from Maharashtra region, today Mumbai, in India, where you can see the falcon and heron above, and the same similar image and motives there are in Persia and practically all over the world. Another instance is a portrait of Maximilian that depicts him wearing or carrying all of the regalia of his rule. He appears reflective, almost distracted, his eyes gazing out of the window. But outside we see a version of the raptor heron motif, symbolizing the extension of his power throughout the air, land, and water of his territory. Again, a political landscape. It is governed from above, here physically by the pair of birds. The same motif appears in other portraits of Maximilian, which show him in a similar pose. Now I turn to another aspect, the artist as observer and surveillance. The artist, as already mentioned, played a decisive role in the observation, measurement, and surveillance of landscapes. In a sense, he or she was a cartographer, a function that strongly shaped collaborations between various activities related to artistic surveillance, as well as to the development of landscape painting in the Netherlands, and also geography, one could say, if you think of Svetlana Alpa's famous relation between cartography and the involvement of painting. A striking instance of this is a painting that you see here of Lucas van Valkenborg that displays a bird's eye view of the city of Linz, today Austria. The artist himself, who appears down and to have momentarily interrupted evidently while observing and sketching the city from above, gazes out at the beholder from the landscape. A nearby standing male figure gestures toward the panoramic townscape, a view that is unobstructed only because a tree has been felled by lightning. Following the trajectory of his gesturing arm, we arrive at another site of surveillance set on the hill opposite, namely the city palace. As parallel entities, artist and palace become counterparts. Using divergent means, they become surveillance of the landscape. And on the lower right, meanwhile, a company of riders is hunting with raptors as indicated by the man on horseback with a raptor on his fist. I hope you can see the detail. Here, the activity of falconry converges with that of the artist with the political landscape, the castle. Might the presence of falconry suggest a play of words with Falkenborg, which means Falcon Castle, which is the artist's name, which has been inscribed on the trunk of the blasted tree. So it seems that there is also a game here about visuality and artistic making. So the question of a power transmission between raptor and artist, together with its connection with visuality, was articulated already by painter and theoretician Karel van Mander, who is, if you like, the Dutch Giorgio Vasari, in his Fundamentals of Painting. So Karel van Mander, and I quote, "When you come to Italy, you must act like the roguish falcons, which place their eyes at the service of the lovely Circe, which is to say, regarding work, you must at times paint landscape on wet chalk in addition to grotesques. For the Italians regard us as good in this field and themselves talented when it comes to figural painting. But I hope we will still succeed in wresting this advantage from them as well." So according to Van Mander, and with regard to landscapes, the artist must possess the eye of a falcon in the sense of observation and sharpness, which also assumes, at least implicitly, a view from above, and is hence also suggestive of the Netherlandish landscape painting so celebrated in Italy. This occurs in the form of an antagonism in relation to the Italians, who are to be emulated when it comes to their speciality, namely history painting. The probable meaning of the term figural painting is used here. But Van Mander expresses the hope that his countrymen will surpass the Italians. So this direct relationship between vision, gaze, and hunting or falconry, however, is not entirely new in art theory. For both Alberti and Leonardo, and Van Manda certainly read Alberti. For Alberti, maybe you know that this formulated this idea that the painting is like a window, right? So they formulate something similar. Namely, Alberti says, the lines of the gaze capture an object as though with teeth, yeah? And closing it as though in a cage. And that to the gaze upon distant objects resembles hunting, Leonardo says. So you see these ideas between hunting and the gaze. In general, the painter, as described somewhat later by Ioannis Valentinus Andrei in the section on painting in his Utopian Christianopolis of 1619, and I quote, must have hunting, sharp eyes, and skillful hands in order to produce imitations. So this passage certainly foregrounds the topos-style coordination between hand and eye, combining it with the metaphor of hunting. The raptor's panoramic vision with its razor-sharp focus parallels the activities of the artist who deploys comparable weaponry, namely his or her hands and eyes, when accurately rendering objects on a two-dimensional surface. And another remark by Van Manda claims that the landscape of Peter Bruegel, the elder, schooled the eye, and moreover in the most diverse directions and variations. This validates the analogy between the movement of the human eye and that of a bird, all the more so when it is a raptor. Here to this description, why I say that, in these paintings, Bruegel teaches us, writes Van Manda, having visited the Rocky Alps, how to gaze almost effortlessly down into dizzying valleys, down to valleys with their cliffs, expansive distant views, and rivers. So you hear already that we are almost like the bird seeing that from above. Resonating here again is the ideal of afterlife principle, and moreover in a way that recalls Van Manda's description of Peter Bruegel's famous swallowing of the alpine landscape, which he later spits out onto the canvas. And Van Manda writes, on his travels he drew many views from life, so that it is said that when he was in the Alps, he swallowed all those mountains and rocks, which upon returning home, he spat out again onto canvases and panels. So faithfully was he able, in this respect and others, to follow nature. End of quote. So the role of visuality, and hence the question of visual representation, which is accompanied, among other things, by the image of the falcon, of course not only, is corroborated by an additional example. We turn now toward a less familiar series, very interesting series, as I find, of portraits by Michiel Schneiders, completed around 1650. Gathered together in this series, and there are about 28 sheets of that. If you are interested, you can check the internet site of the Rijksmuseum. There you can go into the Rijksstudio, create yourself a Rijksstudio, and look for those images. You can download everything. If you want to publish something about it, you can use it because they are commons free, which is a kind of interest. So, gathered together in these about 28 prints, and I just show you here one, we have portraits of well-known contemporary artists around the 16th and 17th European art, together with various models drawn from nature, whether animal or human, and anatomical figures. One sheet shows Lucas van Leyden together with a Rubens-like figure who fixes the viewer with his gaze. Rendered on the sheet as well are various animals, among them lions, squirrels, and an eagle carrying sheep up into the sky. Alongside the figure and a male torso, Snyder's depicts a falcon, and directly beneath it, a crustacean crawling out of its shell. This entire non-hierarchical spectrum encompasses phenomenon from the visible world, without, however, developing a specific know-how or directly invoking the customary instruction books for artists current at the time. Which is very important, this non-hierarchy of vision. All kind of animals and creatures, high and low, are brought together. If you like, it is almost the idea of Abi Warburg of the Atlas in the 20th century. You have it already here. This non-hierarchical visual capacity of high and low and coexistence. Summoned by the figures is any number of associative relationships exemplifying the successful application of invention through precise observation and imagination. So an invention has to have precise observation, but it has to have imagination. Otherwise, no invention. In this way, and very much in the spirit of the citation from Van Manda, characteristics such as the sharp vision of the raptor becomes components of artistic training, all the more so when the art of landscape is involved. So the above described phenomena seem to have been appositely visualized in a painting by Jan Bruegel the Elder. Visible from an elevated position in an open landscape with a castle in the background surrounded by vegetation. Assembled on the left-hand side is an elegantly attired company joined by numerous dogs but also raptors and riffles. Evidently, this is a hunting party. Observing the group from the background, apparently is a group of 3 peasants. Social hierarchy and distinction are well marked here visually. In fact, the picture clearly depicts the Archduchess Isabella Clara Eugenia of Spain, daughter of Philip II, and her husband, Archduke Albrecht VII, sovereigns of the Netherlands, accompanied by a number of courtiers. Observable here is the hierarchy prevailing within court society. Visible in the large field adjoining the castle are stags, but also human figures, as well as isolated birds. High in the air, a raptor, probably a falcon, catches the viewer's attention. Investigating the landscape, it presumably belongs to the group of hunters. The imposing castle is the hunting lodge known as Mariemont, constructed by Isabella and Albrecht in 1600s, after plans designed by Isabella's aunt Mary of Hungary, who is depicted as a falconer in several paintings. So while Bruegel, this is the son of Bruegel, Peter Bruegel, the famous one, positions the group in a small area, the picture's format allows him to display an expansive landscape. The elevated position accorded to the beholder, a classical bird's eye view, also points the eye toward the approaching raptor, high up in the air, and the painting with the 2 sovereigns, the castle, the falconry, and the hunting party is, in other words, a visual demonstration of power par excellence. In the present context, another picture by the same artists, which resembles almost a pendant to the previous one, engages us in an enthralling dialogue that makes clear what I would like to say concerning visuality. Substituting for the raptor and the riffles are, among other things, an extremely early depiction of a spyglass. You can see that, I hope. The same castle is depicted and framed in a similar way. This painting, too, suggests the pastime of falconry. The spyglass, a novel instrument designed for surveying and observing the landscape, seems to have taken over the role of the raptor and functions as a mobile tool of surveillance in contrast to the static castle. It is moreover Albrecht himself who holds the telescope. He acts as it were as another raptor scanning the territory. At the same time, as in the other picture, the raptor is depicted flying high in the sky, searching for prey. Interestingly, in 1599, Albert had already returned a pair of binoculars to Charles Leligne, named Grand Falconer of the Habsburg Netherlands by Albert and Isabella in 1600s, so that the local use of the spyglass was not their first experience with such optical equipment. A new technological invention, on the one hand, here, and a pre-technological ars, a technique, over there, both standing for control and surveillance, are shown here hand in hand. Both of these depicted landscapes are also political landscapes. The spyglass, sharpness of vision, its scopic authority, personified a ruler's power of the landscape, over the earth, water, air, the human inhabitants, including the peasantry, since even the wood they gather belongs to the sovereign. Things are similar with hunting reserved to the aristocracy, following a decree issued by Isabella, which contains an important stipulation. It says, fur against fur, feather against feather. This means that the hounds are to be used to bring down animals and raptors to bring down birds. Importantly, Jan Bruegel, the painter here, served at the Brussels court beginning in 1606, becoming court painter in 1610. And these paintings were created exactly in those years. Another interesting detail is that in 1609, Guido Bentivoglio, a papal nuncio at the court of Albert and Isabella, mentions the use of the new spyglass at a hunting party which involves a falconry hunt. Recently, and I quote, I had the occasion to test the instrument belonging to His Highness, being present with him and the most serene Infanta at a heron hunt outside Brussels. Bentivoglio's remark, however, is contemporary with the painting's production. Enacted here is a transfer of the power of the gaze into the landscape, whether by a raptor or by a technical device. There are dozens of pictures that show raptors over landscape, and I just show you here one, because we want to come to also to an end. This is the landscape with Tobias. The falcon hunt is accorded a prominent place with a pair of herons and raptors shown in mid-air. In this painting, a number of figures gaze out from the crowd or gesture toward the same object. It is, however, unclear whether the presence of a raptor involves a specific semantics in each instance, or whether its presence instead represents little more than a compositional effect. The panoramic landscape here contains numerous figures, and you can see here is the story with Tobias and the angel. You see above the falcon going after the heron, and the idea of that is actually this kind of inversion that was developed in the Netherlands, that they put in front the still life, and on the back is the actual historical thing that happens, which is here something from the, or either from the Old or the New Testament. And this tradition goes back to different artists like Cornelis Massais, who follows the idea of panoramic landscapes, and he places a female falconer here and the Pallas on the same visual axis. So the pre-technological cultural practice of falconry and the spyglass, still a new technology, represent two complementary forms of surveillance. And just as the spyglass allows the gaze to wander widely The same is true of the raptor. Both conquered the landscape. At this time, I would like also to emphasize additional parallels. Federico Borromeo, who befriended Jan Bruegel and collected his works, remarked concerning some of the pictures in his collection, and I quote, "They enclosed in narrow places the space of the earth and the heavens, and this allows us to go wandering and making long journeys, standing still in our room. Here the landscape links sky and earth with one another and is said to allow the gaze to wander." Engaging the senses of sight and touch, falconry may be construed as a sensorial extension or prosthesis of the human eye and body. Thinking in terms of perspective and surveillance, the raptor with its bird-eye view could be even perceived as an organic drone avant la lettre. In the context of falconry and in relation to control of the territory from above, it is worth to emphasizing the verticality of political authority. Such depictions of rural activities and their motives originate in the tradition of calendar miniatures that I just show you here very briefly. Like the Limburg brothers. At the same time, the emphasis lie on a controllable landscape shaped by humans. Falconry was imported into the Low Countries as a pastime of the high nobility before trickling down to the lower nobility or the regent class. I would like to finish with the last example, our talk. Here I show you the continuation of this tradition, and my final example is this print. In an engraving by Jan Zandredam, dating from 1602, the two antagonists, the cura publica and war, are put together in a remarkable alliance that sounds up the present discussion. Zandredam again employs a bird's-eye view, allowing him to bring image and text together in the same medium, because as you can see, the print has image and text and is of course also an image vehicle. Both the hunter with his rifle and hounds and the falconer flank the coat of arms of the Confederation of the 17 provinces, thus alluding to the political situation and the desire for peace for all the provinces. Enacted in the heavens above is the struggle between heron and raptor, with the latter attacking the former, a reminiscence perhaps of the continuing state of war. This means that this image unites the struggles both with and between animals and the hope for a lasting peace, for the two are sides of the same coin. The fact that all of this is brought into connection with those activities that serve as sources of national identity in the Netherlands, the maid milking cows, the farmer plowing a field, and the boats and ships symbolizing the mercantile activities associated with Mercury, indicates just how closely these activities are associated with the self-images of both parts of the Netherlands and with the political power of the landscape. All of these elements, finally, whether in the air, the water, or on the land, are unified through the bird's eye view. Zandredam propagates this in word and image, even bundling countervailing principles to create a unified overall image, an image not without tensions. The landscape becomes an image-scape, one that almost seems to be endowed with creative energy and agency, and moreover, several years before the actual peace between the northern and southern Netherlands. To sum up, on the one hand, a landscape through a bird's eye view becomes the shapeable visual entity of a territorial power here embodied by the falcon. On the other, falconry as an activity that is practiced by sovereigns as well calls attention to the landschap, the landscape, as a politicized territory whether in peacetime or in times of war. This is related to the polyvalent nature of falconry, which symbolizes aggressivity as well as unity. In their images, artists sought to visualize precisely this aspect, or to put it differently, to present falconry in pictorial representational terms as a tool for authority within a respective political landscape that may become also subversive, as the art of falconry also is. Falconry and devices such as the bird's eye view served as dynamic models, as metaphors for governing both falcons and humans, and last but not least, a territory. This is the essence of the successful cura publica, where the state or even an empire becomes a kind of falcon, almost a living biological artwork in full and